I'm also Director of Philanthropy for the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra and a curator at Mills Gallery in Winter Park. I'm here just to welcome you all and to say we should just congratulate all of us for what we've been able to do in the arts in the pandemic. It's been such a journey, and it's so exciting to have us here together in a hybrid model, in person, and you on the screen. Thank you for joining us. I'm here to introduce Jennifer Jones, our President and CEO of the Florida Cultural Alliance, and welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, everybody who's logged on, and for the tech people here at the Orlando Rep for making us able to see who's logged on, and thank you for everyone who's here in person. My name is Jennifer Jones. I won't take too long because I think we have some of the best minds in arts advocacy as elected leaders here at the table, so I want to get through really quickly. But I will say that you should have gotten an invitation to this meeting, a link to the Victory Lab Toolkit, which basically has everybody's Twitter accounts, everybody's name and email address, and if you're a member of Florida Cultural Alliance, there's already an image, so you can just post it and tag them so that all your legislators, your district is right there. You don't even have to look them up. You just tag your people and start our virtual Victory Lab. We're starting it in Orlando because we have 3 of our greatest champions here. So I want to thank Senator Bracy and Representative Eskamani and Representative Smith, all 3 for joining us in person, because they joined us in person in Tallahassee for 40 days and 40 nights and around the rock twice before we got to the promised land. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to quit rambling because I'm so good at that, that I'll be still, and I just want to begin our agenda, if you don't mind.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Senator Randolph, Bracy, District 11, West Orange County. It's a pleasure to represent this area, to fight for arts funding. I would just say arts have been a part of my life since I can remember. It's funny, I'm looking at my sister who's in front of me, who's the head of the Florida Arts and Culture Council. Did I get that right? Yeah, almost. But she has been in the arts since she was a child, and so I think my family has always had an appreciation for the arts. We were always going to watch her in her plays, and she majored in theater, and so I have an appreciation for the arts and the impact it has on a community. I think it brings a character to a community and culture and so many other things. And so I think that's really the beginning of a legislator fighting for arts funding, is having an appreciation for what it brings to the community. And so that's why I fight for it, and I see the importance of it. And so it's been important to me since I've been in the legislature, and this year was a big year for arts funding, specifically for African American facilities. And I was proud to been a part of those conversations and spearheading that effort.
So again, for everyone for having us here today, and to be next to my colleagues, it's always such a joy. And like getting back into in-person events, just so exciting. And I say that because actually yesterday I was able to go to the Winter Park Playhouse for the Florida New Musical Festival, and got to see an incredible performance of the Golden Door, all in a live audience, and it was just so rejuvenating to be back in those spaces. So I look forward to more and more of those events as we all get vaccinated. And again, my name is Eskamani, really proud to serve District 47 in the state legislature. You are in District 47, so for those of us who are here, welcome, and to my constituents, thank you for being here. And to those on Zoom, thanks so much for tuning in as well. This issue is very, very important to me in a special way. Many folks know that when I was a kid, going to Orange County Public Schools, my mom passed away to cancer when I was 13 years old. And she was an artist as well. I actually have in my office, both in Orlando and in Tallahassee, some of her paintings. And one of the paintings she actually never finished, but I keep it in my office in Tallahassee as a reminder that we all have to finish one another's work, right? That maybe she's not on this planet anymore, but we have to honor those no longer with us through action And just because her story never had a proper ending doesn't mean that others have to end the same, that we can work to prevent that. And so I've always just had this ecosystem where art was a part of it, whether it was singing or painting. But for me, after losing my mom, high school theater became a safe space. I remember seeing my first ever musical when I was a freshman at University High School, and it was Carousel. And I just fell in love with Carousel. I went back and saw that performance at least 2 or 3 times. Maybe I thought some of the actors were cute too. But I definitely, but everyone looks better on stage, let me put it that way. But I definitely felt drawn to it. And so I actually started getting involved as a thespian doing technical theater. And so anyways, when I got to decide to run for office back in 2017, growing up in this district, I knew that arts and culture was very important to us at a larger scale. And so I made it one of my campaign priorities to increase arts and culture funding, because at the time it was only at $2.8 million. It was just cut since the 2008 recession never was restored. And so actually it was this very stage where myself and Representative Smith and back in January 2019, hosted with the help of the arts leaders like Vicky and Joshua Vickery and others, we brought together an incredible panel in this room, had a full house, and we set the stage that this needed to be a legislative priority. And sure enough, that first year, working with Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, we were able to do that. We increased it by 800% my first year in office, and have just continued on that effort ever since. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I'm excited to dive deeper into this conversation.
Good morning, and thank you, Representative Eskamani and Senator Bracy, for sharing those kind words, and also thank you to the Orlando Repertory Theatre for hosting us. It is so great to be back in this space. To Representative Eskamani's point, it is great to be here in a community that has managed to survive through a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic despite all odds. And we know, and we'll get into this discussion later, that for arts and culture groups, during COVID, y'all were first to close and last to reopen for the most part. So we know that there's been such a disproportionate impact on the arts when we talk about the economic consequences of COVID-19. But why are the arts important to me personally? Well, certainly I feel like I began my journey in arts advocacy as a legislative assistant for a former state representative and friend, Joe Saunders, who represented the same district in East Orlando that I represent. And by the way, I represent House District 49. That's in East Orange County, so that includes UCF, Waterford Lakes, kind of Union Park area. And when I was his legislative aide, I actually was introduced to my friend at the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra, Dr. Mary Palmer, and I was introduced to a number of other leaders in the community where we were really trying to elevate the importance of arts education in our public schools. And we were rallying behind the Arts for All Students Act, I remember in 2014. And so, really I started with a fundamental, in the legislature, a fundamental value that arts are really, really important, but we also know that in tough economic times, that the tendency of our school leaders, of our state leaders, is that when they're gonna cut budgets, where do they always go first? Especially in our schools, they go to the arts, they go to physical education, cut. But we had to really make the strong argument that we understood and knew to be true, which is that for so many students, they are thriving in their educational environment because of their engagement in the arts. That arts class, that theater class that Anna was talking about, is the thing that they look forward to all day long, and it's the thing that kind of gets them through some of their other classes and some of their other academics. And so we understand that there's data behind the reality that students perform better, they see stronger learning gains as students when they're more engaged in the arts. So we know that that's really, really important. And to Representative Eskamani's point about now funding for the arts through the Division of Cultural Affairs, we're going to talk about this more as well, but it's really, really exciting to see the growth of the Florida legislature in the last few years as far as its growing commitment to making sure that we fund those grants through the Division of Cultural Affairs. This year, as you know, we were able to secure pretty much double what grant support we had from the legislature last year. So we're looking at $26.7 million in grants for 668 organizations around the state of Florida, which is huge. It's not even full funding.
So thank you all for sharing that personal perspective with us and why you got started in advocating for the arts. I want to blow through just really practical plan A. I broke down the agenda and we assigned a person to each topic, and you get to revisit if it wasn't your topic that we gave you. So we were going to start with practical plan A, and I was going to ask Representative Eskamani first about the importance of advocacy in district, and then we'll go, and I'll go ahead and say that Representative Smith, you'll be next as far as committee weeks and delegation meetings, when all the chambers are coming together in their counties. And then, Senator Bracy, I'm going to ask you about during session, because something happened during session at the tail end this year. And then we're going to go to Plan A+. There's no Plan B, there's A and A+. And so we'll start with Representative Eskamani.
I love that. And I think this breakdown is actually really important because so many advocacy organizations and leaders, they come to session week 5, week 6, and it's really heartbreaking to tell folks, well, actually, it's too late. The committee meetings have concluded, or we're already going through the budget process, whatever the timeline is. So I think having this perspective will be really, really important, because I would argue that right now, this summer, is probably one of the most important timelines for advocates. So legislative session for 2021 ended April 30th. The governor actually gets the budget between April 30th and now, and if folks remember, he just got the budget maybe 2-3 weeks ago. So he signed the budget pretty late compared to when session ended. So I share that because this is the time from June 28th to, September 18th, I think. This is the timeline where lawmakers are back home, but it's also where the budget gets signed along with bills that are either signed or vetoed. So that's what happens during this summertime up to the fall. And so what do we do as advocates? So first of all, relationships really matter in this work. And even if your lawmaker is someone that you disagree on other issues, it's important to find common ground in the areas where that's possible. And I would argue that arts and culture funding is one of those areas. We would not be successful as 3 Democrats sitting before you if we weren't working with our Republican colleagues across the aisle to secure this funding. And there were many, many late visits from the different budget chairmen to my office during the budget conferencing period, which Senator Bracy will talk to, where this was the topic, was the House and the Senate debating over how much money to put into the Division of Cultural Affairs, right? But that relationship was built prior to session even starting. And so if you don't know your lawmaker at a state level, whether it's your state house rep or your state senator, now's the time to start building that relationship. And as we've talked about before, thanking them for supporting arts and culture funding. So appreciation goes a long way. Most lawmakers only hear from constituents when there's some sort of crisis. Or they're upset about something, which, of course, that's super valid and that shouldn't stop. But just like when you leave a review for a small business, a lot of reviews tend to be the negative ones. Think about the importance of a positive review for a small business. The same type of approach with a member of elected office, is they also want to hear what are they doing right. and to be able to make that contact and say, you know, I really appreciate you for supporting arts and culture funding. I'd love to invite you to my theater, or invite you to my museum, or invite you to meet some of my young people that are in the orchestra, you know, whatever the organization is, whether you have a physical building or members of a group that can introduce themselves to this lawmaker. Think about how do you build that relationship beyond just you as a person, a lawmaker, but also the greater organization that you're representing. And I think that also giving lawmakers the opportunity to meet constituents and meet folks face to face is really valuable. A lot of the conversations we had early on in my first session was just helping Republican lawmakers see the value investing in arts and culture. And it's funny because so many of them just think about sports. And I remember having a conversation with, at the time, Chair Travis Cummings from the Jacksonville area. And I knew he goes to basketball games and football games. So when I started talking about arts and culture, he was like, okay. Yeah, I think my daughter took ballet lessons, right? So you start seeing that shift of folks realizing that actually arts and culture is involved in your life, right? Even if it might not be the focus of your Sunday, it might still be somewhere in your realm. And so to help build that relationship and help folks realize that it does intersect with their life and with their communities. And then I would also encourage folks during this summertime to try to make those appointments, because once you get to committee weeks, and especially session, it can be hard to get FaceTime with your lawmakers because they're just really, really busy. I mean, we have a packed committee week agenda. We're jumping from meeting to meeting to meeting. And so definitely use this time to not only acknowledge them on social media, right? So it's good to send thank you tweets or thank you comments and things like that, but actually request time to connect. Can I spend 15 minutes with you in your office? I mean, there's so many great intersections with the arts to trauma managed mental health care services or PTSD interventions and recovery centers and arts. I mean, I was just visiting one of our prisons on Friday for their arts education program that they do with UCF. So to also think about not just the ROI when you're having this conversation with lawmakers, but what's also some of the quality of life impact, whether it's with our seniors or with our youth or for those who are veterans or incarcerated. So much great examples to show that can help that lawmaker kind of think beyond a theater setting or a museum setting, which they might assume is just people with money coming to a show, right? And that was one of the efforts that we had to change too, was to help lawmakers realize this isn't about, folks of means coming to the opera. Like, we're talking about the ability for every person, regardless of race, orientation, gender identity, disability status, having access to arts and culture, and that being transformational. So,
second that, the importance of meeting with the legislator in the summertime, if possible, just because when committee weeks are happening, when session is happening, we have 15-minute increments of just people we're seeing all day, and they're all asking for money usually. So I think the importance is, the time to meet is now, because most legislators will have more time. It may be a 15-minute meeting, but it can turn into an hour because they don't have as much on their agenda. So I really would stress that point that she made, that if you can get on a legislator's calendar, do it if you can. And I would focus on people in leadership, to be honest, the approach chairs, the chairman or chairwomen of these subcommittees that will be responsible for allocating this money.
So I'll just jump in real quick and say, because I think I'm pretty clever, so I have to tell you, even though it'll probably fall flat. So this is the power, and the power's at home. So when the power goes out, and we know that happens in Florida, when the power goes out, where does the power go? You should invite them to your event. Ask them to open up the event and say, look at the money you gave us, what it's doing. Specifically the ones that the grant is funding, I would say it's like, oh, we're having this thing. We recognize that this is funded partially by the Division of Cultural Affairs, and to open up the ceremony is Representative Smith. And they'll remember that. You don't have to ask them for a thing. Let them see what, put, kind of I don't know the term for it, teeth in your request that you'll make later, but they haven't experienced, so that when they hear about it and see your face again, that they were like, oh, I was there and that was cool. And if they had kids, make sure you invite them to the kid thing you did so that their kid has fun. So, I mean, it's just, I think it's really important that they meet us when we're not asking, and that when we say thank you, that they're like immersed in the middle of what you're thanking them for, so that they feel it too. So I'll be quiet and let you, if you don't mind, starting with delegation and committee weeks.
Thank you, Jennifer. So let's talk about the legislative calendar so that everyone understands, because I know that folks are joining us from across the state, and while we all follow the same legislative calendar, it's important for everyone to, understand the basics. So in 2022, we will start legislative session in January. It's actually going to start right around the beginning of January, and it's going to go till about early March. This is actually not what we do every year. We kind of, on election years, we meet earlier in the calendar year, as opposed to this year in 2021. We didn't start session until March, right? We started in March. But in the lead up to the legislative session, when we're there for 60 days, the Constitution requires that we're in session for a full 60-day, 2-month calendar. We have committee weeks in Tallahassee. So this is actually starting up for us in September, and it goes through December. We basically are up there every couple of weeks, and that's actually really when the legislative session kind of begins. It's not officially starting, but we are having committee hearings. We're voting on bills, we're debating bills, and we're starting to move forward with what the agenda will be for that legislative session. But in 67 counties across the state, we also have what's called a legislative delegation. The Orange County legislative delegation is all state senators and all state reps for the Orange County area. Now, every delegation meeting is going to be on a different date, but my advice to you first as advocates is find out, when is your county legislative delegation going to be meeting? Because that is going to be a prime opportunity for you to be able to engage with all of your state legislators in your area at the same time. Now, in Orange County, where we're a larger county, we have, how many lawmakers do we have in our delegation? We have like 12 or 13, right?
Yeah.
So we're all together. We always meet in the Orange County Board of County Commission chambers, and it's essentially a public hearing where all of us are there. You have a captive audience, and we hear from groups all the time about important issues happening in our community, whether it be affordable housing, unemployment, access to healthcare benefits, issues with our public schools, all issues, of course, that we deal with as state lawmakers. But what we want to make sure happens at all of these 67 delegation meetings is we want to make sure that legislators are hearing about the arts and the importance of funding for the arts. So each of you as individual community leaders need to be figuring out amongst yourselves, how are we coordinating that? Who is speaking on behalf of all of the arts? Are we going to have one person speaking on behalf of all of us? Or are we each going to represent our organizations, or both? Listen, I think that it's important that we continue reinforcing the message as far as the need to have this funding. So I think a good example of what good advocates would be doing, finding out when their county delegation meeting is, putting in a speaker card to make sure they register in advance to be able to speak as a member of the public, and have folks who are there reinforcing the message over and over. Here in Orange County, I know every delegation meeting we hear from many of the grantees that benefit from the Division of Cultural Affairs grant list. In Orange County, I know that there's at least 24, I think there's about 24 grantees who have received grants from the Division of Cultural Affairs, and we hear from a lot of them at the delegation meeting, right, Vicki? Yes, we hear from the Orlando Repertory Theatre, we hear from the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra, we hear from Central Florida Community Arts, like we hear from these groups, and it's important that lawmakers hear, because when they go to Tallahassee, they're thinking, who are the entities that are interested in grant funding? If you go to the Division of Cultural Affairs website, you can actually pull the list of all 666 organizations sorted by county, so that you know in your county, these are the groups that are funded by arts and culture grants in the legislature, so that you can specifically know. I know this because when we were on the House floor and we were fighting for an increase in grant funding, I had the list of grantees, all 668 printed out. I had several copies, and I would go to lawmakers' desks and I would say, hey, Republican lawmaker from Pinellas County, here's all the Pinellas County grantees that are watching how you're going to be voting on arts and culture grant funding. And they recognize the names, because these are obviously very well-known organizations and arts and museum groups in their areas. So making sure that you're represented at the county delegation meeting is really, really important. And making sure that you have an opportunity also to engage when we have Arts Day in the Capitol, which the Florida Cultural Alliance always does a great job of hosting. I don't know what the date is this year, but typically it's normally a couple of weeks into legislative session, and that is a really important opportunity as well. But I want to underscore what Senator Bracy said, because he reminded us of the importance of trying to meet with your lawmaker before they go up to Tallahassee for session. I can speak for myself, as once that 60 days in session starts, I don't come back to the Orlando district very often.
And real quick, I just want to add something else to Representate's point. Also thinking about untraditional partners who could also speak in support of arts and culture funding at the delegation meeting. For example, here in Orange County, the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce is always a voice for arts and culture funding. When they come to the delegation meeting, that's one of their first topics, is arts and culture funding, because they know in Winter Park it is such a key component of the community. And so think about who are the untraditional partners that can also amplify the importance of arts and culture funding. Could be the business community, maybe there's faith-based organizations that also know the benefit because their churches or temples or mosques house arts and culture groups. But think about untraditional advocates who could join you in this work.
I'll say something real quick. We're getting some questions about how people can find out about their delegation meetings, and I actually had called the House, and they didn't get to publish the new delegation directory over this past session, but we'll be posting a schedule of delegation meetings when we find them out. If you want to try and find out on your own because you can't wait for us to find out, I'd say contact your senator's office, because they kind of they include more people. The Senate districts are larger than the House districts, so they will have a lot of their your House of Representatives within their district, and it typically falls to a senator's office to be the delegation chair that coordinates it. But we'll be publishing it as well. The thing is, too, if Orlando or Orange County starts in August, that's pretty early, but session's starting pretty early. It's early, in my opinion, because the Division of Cultural Affairs often isn't done reviewing the grants, so we don't know what our specific ask is in August. We'll probably end up knowing by the end of September, because then it has to go to the Secretary of State, and there's a whole process. So it's good to kind of know your own business and know, appeal on a personal level, especially if delegation meetings are happening really early, because we won't have the platform with a specific ask put together, because it just won't have happened in the reviews. And I think what the Florida Arts Council has to see the facilities grants applications. So, and that's going to happen, in September? October. So we won't know the full ask until after that happens. So it's that relationship's going to be really important this year, because we won't have specific numbers. And I'll be quiet and let you now go, Senator Bracy.
Thank you. I'm going to reiterate the personal relationship, which I think is vitally important. And I'll just give a quick story. I went to meet with the Senate President. He's an egg farmer. I went to his farm before last session, spent the whole day with them. We didn't talk about any legislation, and well, at the end, after I left, right when I was leaving, that was the ask. But the point is, and out of that, those conversations and that relationship building, the $30 million came later. So for 8 hours of connection, resulting in $30 million, I think it's worth it. But my point, though, is that many of the advocates will not have that kind of access. But if they can get that 15 or 20 minutes outside of committee weeks and session, they remember it more than when they're meeting with folks while we're in Tallahassee. So I just want to hammer that point home. And I just want to stress about this $30 million for African American facilities and museums. I think it's so important that is a part of the overall conversation about arts funding. And so diversity, inclusion, I'm glad to be a part of keeping that as a part of the conversation about arts funding. And so I just want to stress that, and I'll leave it there.
Well, I would like to stress that too, but I didn't know how far down the road we were with that, because I know we're waiting on the details before people can apply. So we all know it's out there. You'll know more than anybody in this room right now.
Yeah, so the criteria is set. I believe it's a maximum of $500,000 that an entity can apply for, and then I think it can go to $1 million if you have matching funds. Did I say that correct? So, and the applications, do you know when they'll be open? Probably September.
So if you're listening or you know someone who may be eligible, it's a brick and mortar program for African American culture and heritage, right? And it's being managed through the Cultural Affairs and Historic Resources Departments. Florida Council on Arts and Culture is going to review them, right? Okay.
Right, and then that would include new entities. So if you don't have an existing structure and you're planning to build a new facility, that entity can apply for those funds also, as well as existing facilities can apply for refurbishment and that type of thing. Yeah.
And Jennifer, I just wanted to add also just on some of the fundamentals on advocacy in the Capitol during session. I know this session was different because they basically closed the Capitol and hid behind COVID restrictions to keep people out of the Capitol. But the Capitol will be open next session, and we want folks to be really effective with their in-district meetings and their Tallahassee meetings. So what are you going to be focusing on during those advocacy meetings? You want to, first of all, understand your audience, know who you're meeting with, know what party they represent, know the area they represent, know the grants that we're applying for from their county, but also understand enough to be able to speak their language. Because yes, what Representative Eskamani said before is really, really important in understanding that this is about helping people as well, funding for the arts, but also, let's be real, the Florida legislature is majority Republican, and what we want to make sure is we're speaking their language, and we're talking about the economics of arts and culture. We know, based on what the Division of Cultural Affairs has done with their own assessment of their grant program, that we get a 9-to-1 rate of return on every $1 that we invest in arts and culture grants through the Division of Cultural Affairs. That is huge. Of course, we know there's a $4 billion economic impact for the arts and culture industry in the state of Florida, and that 9-to-1 ratio, I still, in all the areas of advocacy that we're engaged in, we're talking about all these different programs that have a rate of return. You know, we meet with lobbyists and special interests all the time who brag about a 2-to-1 rate of return, and I'm like, who cares? Like, 9-to-1 rate of return. But a lot of times lawmakers also don't understand the fundamentals of why this grant funding is important. They think of the arts as like some liberal idea or these are well-off organizations that don't need grants from the state during hard times. That is not the reality for arts and culture groups. It doesn't matter if you're, if you're the ballet, or if you're a museum, or if you're one of the 668 organizations that are applying for cultural and museum grants in addition to other grants. The reality is that all of the grantees depend on a diverse funding stream that absolutely includes grants from local, state, and federal governments. Without grants from local, state, and federal governments, many of these groups cannot survive. Yes, there are ticket sales involved. Yes, there is private philanthropy involved. But all of those are key components in combination with government grants. So understanding the fundamentals of why these grant resources are important, especially for a lot of organizations that are using it for operational costs, which are harder for them to fundraise off of with private donations, private philanthropy. It's important that you get those economic messages, that you're leading with that too, so that they fully understand the impact of every dollar that they're investing in the grant program, because it really does make a difference, and it does resonate with so many of our Republican colleagues, certainly, who are talking about dollars and cents.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. It is important to make sure that you can relate the impact of the arts funding to the legislator that may be from a rural Republican district that may not have as many arts entities as we do here in Orlando. And so I think it's important to do your homework before you meet with that legislator and to find out why it's important to that person, because I think it'll have a lot more impact. How does arts funding impact the state, not just Central Florida or South Florida? And if you can make that argument, I think it'll be a lot more effective.
And I'll just add to the timeline of legislative session. So there's a moment near the end of session called budget conferencing. And this is really important for anyone who has an item in the state budget where basically both chambers, these temporary committees are created based on the budget silo. So this arts and culture always falls under the transportation and like tourism budget, which seems a little random, but that is actually the budget silo that's very, very popular and important because it actually has the most loose money. By that I mean it has the most money that is flexible. Because some of the other budget silos, like healthcare, for example, or education, some of those dollars have to be spent on a very specific education line item, or Medicaid in the healthcare budget. Some of those dollars are not flexible. In this budget silo, the dollars are very flexible. So a lot of member projects that are specific to their communities exist in this budget silo. So that chairperson is very popular. Everybody wants to meet with them. They're probably one of the busiest. And actually, this past legislative session, the chairman of that committee, Jay Trumbull in the House, became the appropriations chair for all of the silos. So it is a very powerful position that tends to lead to other powerful positions. So those relationships, like Senator Bracy said, are really important with those chair people because they tend to have just a lot of sway and influence with the speaker, with the Senate president, and how money is spent. With that said, during budget conferencing, you're gonna have the chairs of both that Senate budget silo and that House budget silo basically dictate the final decisions of a budget before it goes to the full body for us to vote on and then to the governor's desk. And sometimes things get bumped. And bumped means that a decision between both chambers could not be agreed upon. So maybe there's a line item for arts and culture, one of the specific programs, and it's not highlighted dark yet, which means they haven't decided how much money they want to put into it. And so this gets bumped. So now it's going to be the two in this case, chairmen, who will decide how much money goes into that line item. And if you didn't do your work beforehand, getting a meeting with them the last week of session is close to impossible. We can do it, we can push hard, but it's tough. You want to have the relationship beforehand. And then there's something called the sprinkle, which is the very end of the process where money is sprinkled to different budget silos based on what's left over. Because remember, staff are a big part of this process, and we should really actually stress that. Relationship with staff is also very important. So thinking about the staff of these budget committees, if you can build a relationship with staff, you should as well, because they know the numbers more than anyone else will. But when the budget is actually, all the silos have bumped things up and they're good to go, there's always going to be a little leftover money that wasn't allocated, a couple $1 million still to go. And the sprinkle is that money being dropped in random buckets. That's where we got increase to disability services this past session, was on the sprinkle list. And so again, relationships really matter, because not only is there just the budget, but then you have the potential of more money with the sprinkle. So again, just stressing the importance of building those relationships, thanking lawmakers when they do increase the budget, and then holding them accountable all through your summer committee weeks, and of course tour session.
And we did get a sprinkle in arts and culture as well.
Right.
It was a $4 million sprinkle. That sounds kind of strange, right? What do you mean a sprinkle? What do you mean it's making, are lawmakers literally making it rain? I mean, we were needling budget leaders for weeks and weeks, but specifically during budget conference, specifically, I remember needling budget leaders on that silo because it has the most impact, because it has the most number of organizations on there, cultural and museum. And sure enough, when the sprinkle list came out, it was $4 million on top of the 19.2 that was already there.
Right.
That's just for cultural and museums, so that was huge.
Let me just say that sprinkle time frame is literally like 24 hours. So it starts at the subcommittee appropriations chairs. That's about 4 or 5 days worth of negotiation. Then it goes to the appropriations chairs, which is about 2 or 3 days. And then it goes to the Senate President and the House Speaker, which is like 1 day. And so at each stop, there's more money that comes into play. So it's important to meet with your respective legislator, but I will stress that the subcommittee appropriations chairs, the head appropriations chairs, and the Senate President, House Speaker, if you can get a meeting with those folks, that's the priority, because that's where the money rains down.
But you can't do it in those 3 days. I mean, you have to have done it in the past. Fortunately, the chair of House Appropriations, I had just moved out of his district. They had 3 grants in the whole thing. And so it was amazing that someone who, it's not amazing, there's good people everywhere in every office, but for someone in that role to only have 3 grants out of 668 to still be willing to move forward with raising appropriations is something. So the relationships are important. Time is of the essence, so I'm gonna be quiet. If you have anything to add about what do you think was key about this last session, or that just like really put us over the top, and I'll be quiet. If there are people in the room that have a question, raise your hand and I'll find you while y'all are talking. And then if you have a question, put them in the chat box as well, and I'll come back and find them.
So I think this year was unique. Obviously, we had a pandemic, but we also had more money than we usually ever see coming from the federal government. And I think that allowed for some of the extra money toward arts funding that we saw this year. And so some of that will carry over into next session. So I think it's a great opportunity to make these connections this summer, because I believe there's going to be even more money for the African American museums again next year. Or excuse me, not museums, but there may be opportunities for programming instead of facilities grants. So the money is here, and I think we need to seize it. And so to the extent that you can make those connections with your legislators, with key people in leadership, then I think now is the time to do that.
Well, and I think what I'll add, I guess, for the A+ part of the segment, that advocacy plus, or what was the moment? What was like the big moment, like go big or go home moment of session for the arts, right? When it comes to the grant funding from the Division of Cultural Affairs, it was certainly the budget amendment. In the House, this is basically what I decided to do a few hours before was, they were presenting the full budget on the House floor. It was like $98 billion, I think, at the time. Huge, gigantic budget. And I decided to go big or go home. So I filed a budget amendment asking for full funding of arts and culture grants, period, end of story. Period. So basically we're asking for like $67 million. And right, which is not a lot of money in what ended up being a $100 billion budget. And we knew that we had the $10.2 billion of American rescue stimulus from President Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress, so we had money to spend. So we wanted to tell the story. I filed an amendment and I said we need full funding for all of these grants, and here's why. And we told the story that arts and culture groups around the state that were struggling due to COVID-19, that were, some of them, a threat to their livelihood, where they're going to close their doors forever because of the threat to live performances for many of them that are performance-based. And we had so much backup in the chamber because we had people like in the House, Representative Eskamani stood up and told her story about why arts and culture funding was important. We had Representative Geraldine Thompson talk about the value of museum funding, and she talked about her history of advocacy as being someone who used to be part of, who used to be the curator at the Wells-built museum, and talked about the significance there. And we had so many people stand up and really tell the story. Now the budget amendment, of course, failed, but it got bipartisan support. A bunch of Republicans voted for the amendment, who became allies behind the scenes. And while the budget amendment failed for full funding, when the House came out with its next offer during the budget process, we saw like a $15 million increase in funding from the House side that was initiated. So they were listening, and we leveraged that moment, that really powerful moment that many of you saw on YouTube or on the Florida channel, to not only get more awareness, but to yield more funds. We won't necessarily be able to replicate, I think, the theatrics, for lack of a better term, of that budget amendment. But I think that it made an impact, and now we just need to keep reinforcing those stories that we're telling about the importance of arts and culture funding, and know that there's bipartisan support is growing.
We have a question here, and I'm sorry, before your question, really quick, I just want to say back to the African American Cultural Heritage grants that will be coming. Don't lose time learning about it when it opens, when the grant cycle opens. Go look right now at the Division of Cultural Affairs website and look at other grant applications for facilities, because that's the model that this grant program is going to be based on. So I just want to say that, since we can't tell everything yet because we don't know everything yet, but you can learn a lot by looking at previous facility grant applications and be ready when the grant cycle opens. So, okay, what is your name?
My name is Mandy Joe.
Mandy Joe.
Hi, my name is Mandy Joe. I am the executive director of Black Theater Girl Magic, which is a brand new nonprofit organization as of January of this year. And my question is, I know that my organization is not the only new arts advocacy organization in this meeting and in the Zoom call. And so my question for the three of you, first of all, thank you for being here today. My question is, what are the most successful new arts organizations doing? What kind of conversations are you having? What actions are you seeing that the most successful arts organizations, when they are first coming to you and when they are first starting, what are you seeing? What can you you tell us that those successful organizations are doing?
Well, first of all, congratulations. That is so cool. It's so special. And you have a community that wants to see you succeed and wants to see your girls succeed, so that's fantastic. It's a really great question. I would say, so over communication to not just lawmakers, I mean, I think to any stakeholder, right? So over communication to your first donors, over communication to your first actors or actresses or techies, whatever your stakeholders are internally, over communication to them. So really setting, what are those goals you have in your first year? Who's going to help you reach those goals? How much money do you need to raise to reach those goals? Really demonstrating to your very early on contributors and community partners that you're doing the work, but there's also buy-in from them to help complement that work. And I speak from experience of just launching a campaign and launching, I'm doing voter registration initiative work right now, and key to our success is reaching our goals, which requires raising money, and that requires building relationships with donors. And so I do think for any new arts organization, look at the landscape of who are the folks who already support arts and culture groups, and see if they would be interested in getting to know your organization as well. Something that is so unique to Central Florida are the partnerships. I never feel like arts and culture groups are competitive. I feel like there's such a great ecosystem of just love and admiration and amplification. And so, when I go to the Winter Park Playhouse, like they're partnering with another local arts, groups. They do Orlando Gay Chorus, that Dr. Phillips. So there's such a great, ecosystem. So I think also getting plugged into that as much as you can and seeing how you can collaborate with others. If you're a new organization, sometimes working with those that have more of an established base can also help amplify your presence and your programming as well. And then from an advocacy perspective, you're doing everything right. You're in this space right now, which is awesome. And I definitely think introducing yourself to lawmakers, asking for that meeting during the summer, and showing what you've done since January, but what your vision is for the future, and how they can help. I think for so many new groups, a lot of the struggles are venues, and finding an affordable venue. So tapping into a lawmaker that can help, expand your network, to find that new venue, or maybe a 10th venue as you get your feet off the ground. I think all of those could be really great asks for a lawmaker that doesn't just focus on session, but it also helps to tap into their network to see what support they can provide.
We have less than a minute left, and we have one more question. So if you don't abandon us, we'll do this one last question, and then we'll adjourn the meeting because you all have places to go. So go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much. First of all, to what Carlos was saying, this is Ricardo Canchola with Interactive Academy. Carlos, you're absolutely right. People have to work together. I think the arts many times are cutting themselves short because we always asking for money, and we don't realize the true power of the arts in the community. And having relationships with for-profit companies, being the Interactive Academy, a for-profit company, people ask me why I don't become a non-profit. Is because I want to show a new relationship between the for-profit companies with the non-profit companies. So it's very important that we are not just looking at the possibilities of working with the non-profit sector. To Anna, and you told me some very important lesson last Christmas with your carol singing out there. So we are creating a new massive singing invitation for community building this year, December the 1st at the Linda Chapin Theater, where all your members of your community are welcome to join us and sing. Opera Orlando, Opera del Sol, Central Florida Vocal Arts, Osceola County Public Schools will be teaching the music where people, 2,600 members in the audience, will be able to sing. They had to learn harmonies and everything, and of course Orlando Philharmonic will be helping us to conduct that. Finally, to Mr. Senator Randolph Bracy, I want to thank you so much. This year, unfortunately, our request for funding for English as a second language through arts integration didn't pan out. But we thank you at least, I know Lila Theriot, Florida Alliance for Arts Education and Interactive Academy, we try but we will continue looking forward to integrate arts education, integrate learning a language through the arts. And thank you so much for at least trying on behalf of all the people who speak second language. Thank you so much, everyone, and that's it.
Thank you all for being here. I'm not like getting in the car right away. LeVon Bracy, do you want to say something? Okay, so if you got somewhere to go, well, it's your sister, so you can't go.
I would be remiss if I just did not say thank you. I represent and wear very many hats. I'm the chair of the Florida Council on Arts and Culture. So all of you all that submit grants, it's the Florida Council that reviews those grants, that submits it to the legislature that funds it. So on behalf of all the grantees, I want to just say thank you to the three of you. Also, I happen to be the Senior Director of Community Programming at the Dr. Phillips Center, which is a recipient of one of the grants. So I am just overwhelmed and just want to, I would just be remiss to let this moment end without just saying thank you. I watched you live when you did your advocacy for like 23 minutes on the House floor. I watched it. We were rooting you on. We were rooting you on. Fight the good fight on behalf of us. So just know you may have felt, I hope you didn't feel by yourself when you were doing that, because know we were watching and we were rooting you on. Thank you so much, Rep. Anna, and to Senator Bracy. I kind of like this guy. We are all realizing in our arts community that representation matters and that diversity and inclusion matters. So what you did, this unprecedented $30 million for African American museums and telling our stories is very, very important. As I represent the arts community, I also represent the African American community. So I would be remiss if I did not say that in 45 seconds, so thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody. So I got one more question. The toolkit on the Advocacy Action Center page of FLCA.net is a Google Drive link. There are images there if you're a member of Florida Cultural Alliance and a grantee, a recipient of one of these grants. There's an image for you there. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, it's what I could do, and I'm sure you have graphic artists. But all you have to do is click that image and post it on social media, and you can tag your legislators that are in a Google sheet. Like it says, you're in, say, District 47 in the House and District 19 in the Senate, and there's your guys, tag them. So it's all there for you. All you have to do is pick it up and put it in social media. If you don't mind tagging us, then we'll know what you're doing. But if you just go to the Victory Lap Toolkit on the Advocacy Action Center page at flca.net, you can find all of that. We'll put up the delegation meetings when that time comes. Your congressional people are also there. We'll be addressing that in a couple months because that's important too. And thank you all. I could talk, I tell you, forever. You know that already. So we're past our hour. You all are busy people leading, and so are you leading in your community and quality of life. So I just appreciate it. We've got a recording going here. I've saved the chat. We'll share everything we've got, and feel free to reach out anytime. And thank you, Jennifer, board member for Florida Cultural Alliance, one of my bosses here in Orlando. And thank you, everybody that joined on the Zoom call. Sorry, I got to see my waistline for that standing up period, but we'll edit that. So thank you all. If you mind, we'll adjourn, and then there's coffee and juice and water out in the lobby. So thanks so much.